Dan Martell grew views on his YouTube channel 11,700% in 18 months, but before that, he spent a decade with almost zero growth. If your business's YouTube has been dead for years, what would a fraction of that do for you? In this video, I'm going to break down 5 things he did that drove that growth and 4 things that didn't. The first obvious change in Dan's strategy is his thumbnails. Part of that is at the pixel level, but the more interesting part isn't. Let me explain. But real quick, I'm Matt Heisig. I ran YouTube for a product brand and added 7 million views, over $4.5 million in revenue. Now I run Hit Factor, which is the software I wish I had when I was growing that channel. This is the entire history of Dan's channel going back to 2014, every long form video he's published. You can see he went from about 6 views per day here in 2023 to over 680 views per day here in 2025. That's the 11,700% increase I told you about. Looking at his thumbnails, you can see back around 2015, Dan's thumbnails had this kind of corporate webinar look. But if you look at his recent videos, you can see he has much more of that modern YouTube look. But what does YouTube look even mean? You can kind of spot it, but almost no one can name what it is. We can measure a lot of stuff at the pixel level, details of the thumbnails. So take color, for instance. Before his big inflection point in 2023, his thumbnails were distinctly less colorful. So we can measure how colorful the pixels of a thumbnail are on average. And before 2023, he was about a 37 or so. Fast forwarding to 2024, 2025, he's at like a 67 or a 70. So a significant increase in colorfulness. What that looks like here is pre-2023, these were kind of drab, kind of muted. His overall median is like a 40 here. But if you look in 2024, you can see that they are distinctly more colorful. So that's one thing that changed at the same time he was growing. You can see a similar story with saturation and contrast. Early on, it's pretty low saturation. And then as he progresses, you get this much more saturated look. Contrast is a similar story, though it's a little bit less pronounced. And I guess here in his 2024 and on era, if all else fails, just take your shirt off. But here's what you should not conclude, that more color or more saturation is guaranteed to get more views. That's not what the data says, so don't run off to Photoshop or Canva and start color maxing all your thumbnails. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but think of it like this. Take a restaurant. So as a kitchen matures over time, the plating gets more refined and the food gets better. Plating isn't nothing. Presentation does move the perception of the food, but nobody thinks that the swoosh of sauce is why the restaurant earned its reputation. The chef's growth moved both over time. What we can see is that his team clearly moved to a different thumbnail style in 2023, and that occurred at the same time he had this huge growth spurt. If we control for time and just compare thumbnail against thumbnail, it's not true that more colorful thumbnails get more views. That being said, if you look at your video catalog and you've been stuck for a while and your thumbnails are all pretty drab and dull, you might want to imitate Dan's team and crank it up a bit. But there's another powerful thumbnail tactic you absolutely should copy from Dan's team, and that's going back into your video catalog and updating old thumbnails. So for instance, this outlier here or this outlier here, these are clearly 2015, 2016 era thumbnails, but they have 2025 Dan Martell's face on them. But most of them don't. Most of them still have that old dated kind of webinar look. So why were just some of them changed? Because his team has probably figured out the same approach that I did, which is to look at your videos and find any video where the average view duration, or AVD, is relatively high for your channel, and the CTR, or click-through rate, is relatively low for your channel. These are videos where people aren't clicking as much as normal, but when they do click, they stick around and watch. That's the data telling you that if you fix the thumbnail or the title, that the video is likely to take off. Basically, it's a signal that the packaging is slowing it down, but underneath it's a really good video. So I strongly suspect that's what Dan's team has done here and why they've only bothered to update certain videos. I've done this myself, and when you fix low CTR thumbnails on a high AVD video, you can see 100x lift in views, even on very old content. But there's a really interesting shift in his thumbnails that isn't at the pixel level at all. Before we dig into that, let's talk about his titles, because there's definitely a story there. Titles are more important than thumbnails. Most people don't believe that, but the data is pretty consistent. I have a title format I call want, avoid, wonder. It measures a title on 3 dimensions: how much it makes a viewer want something, avoid something, or wonder about it. Basically, it's the 3 components that tend to make titles work. It correlates well with views across a huge number of channels. I scored all of Dan's titles against this model on a scale of 0 to 100, so 0 being the worst title title 100 being the strongest title against the want, avoid, wonder model. And we charted it here on this orange dashed line. He's pretty flat here for a decade and through 2023 and 2024. And then he starts this steady upward trend in his title scores starting in late 2023, early 2024. He's now scoring in the, mid 70s or 80s on his titles, which actually puts him in the top 1% of titles against this model. If we break down the individual components of that, you can see that he had a significant shift in how much he focuses on the want component. So using the title to highlight something the viewer wants. He doesn't highlight avoidance as much, so he's not kind of hitting like fears or pains in the title quite as much. And his wonder component went up substantially. There's some other really interesting shifts in his title structure. So before his huge growth surge, he did a lot of how-to videos. Those kind of collapsed. So in 2015 to 2019, about 50 to 80% of his videos were how-tos. And then from 2023 on, that drops to like 15% of his videos were how-tos. He basically abandoned the whole instructional how-to format. Numbers in his titles jumped a lot. So he was about 30 to 40% of his titles included numbers pre-surge and then post-surge and mid-surge. It goes up to about 70%. So significant increase in kind of that listicle or that numeric framing. And then his use of all caps words kind of exploded. So pre-surge, it was like 5 to 10%. Post-surge, over half his titles have capital letters in them. So kind of that emphasis style, I guess, shouting at people in titles may be effective. Now, once again, these are things that occurred around the same time, not causation. I'm not suggesting you stop doing how-to content if that doesn't fit with your channel strategy. But what we're seeing is a media team that in 2023 changed how they operate. They started doing thumbnails differently, more YouTube style. They moved away from how-to content, started adding a lot of numbers emphasis, started targeting the curiosity drivers of want and avoid and wonder. And remember, all the things they did together is what resulted in this absurd 11,000% growth. That growth is a headline, but let's not forget this 10-year plateau, because we've all been in this rut. The rut here might be more relatable than anything else on this chart. And Dan was here for almost a decade. He did what everyone says to do. Put out videos regularly, post content for 10 years. So did the regular posting drive views? Not really. It doesn't seem to matter much, at least as a direct driver. Down here at the bottom, we can track how many videos, long-form videos, he posts per month. And during this entire 10-year period, he's about 4 a month or 1 per week. He does increase here to about twice a month during this period. Then here in 2022 through middle of 2024, through his entire growth surge, he's doing 1 a week. So he's back to doing 1 a week like he was during the plateaued period. Lately, he's doing about 2 a week here in the kind of his peak here in 2026. So a couple of important things here. One, he kept going and didn't quit. Kudos to Dan. We should all be this persistent. Number two, it's also possible to grind away at the same thing for a decade and not accomplish much. I think we all want to think that if you just work hard enough, you can achieve anything. At the same time, it's also a little depressing to look at this flat line chart and imagine yourself grinding away, going kind of nowhere for 10 years. The biggest takeaway here is that in order to get a result on his channel, Dan had to do something different. And that's true for all of us. If what you're doing isn't getting the result you want, and it's been a decade, you probably need to try something else. I'm sure the reps over that decade helped develop his strategy for sure, but eventually he had to change it up because pure regular posting wasn't getting the job done. There's another aspect I get asked about over and over, and that's how long should videos be? Here's the answer from Dan's channel. Doesn't really seem to matter. He was around 5 minutes for a long time. He peaks here around 20 minutes in his heavy posting period. He actually dives back to about 7 minutes as the growth curve kind of starts to take off. Lately, he's settled in around 15 or 16 minutes. This finding is consistent across any channel I've looked at, and the takeaway is this: don't worry about it. Make good content, make it engaging, and whatever length it ends up being is fine. So that doesn't matter much, but let's dive into one of the most dramatic changes yet on Dan's channel, and that's this orange dash line that seems to suspiciously track with his views. And this line is his hook score over time. I don't like graphing dual y-axis charts because it can be misleading, and right up front, I don't want to mislead you with this. Dan does dramatically increase his hook craft during the same era that his growth went to the moon. But what do I mean by hook craft? The model model I'm using here is the 4P model. That's promise, plan, proof, and pain. I've got a separate video where I break down how Alex Hormozi uses this, and I got the rough idea from Hormozi, so check out that video for the details. You can see that Dan was generally pretty weak on hooks. He was getting about a 35 or a 40 out of 100, which would still put him in the top half or so. Then he just starts hammering his hook format against this 4P model, and he's now consistently in the top 1% of all hooks we've scored against this model. At this point, it's about 150,000 videos we've scored. Digging into his hooks a little bit more, if we group his videos into bins by score here, you can see that when he's scoring an 88 to 100, he's getting around 800 VPD or views per day. When you go down to a score of about 75, he's half that, and below 75, it just craters. Now, I'll repeat my previous caution. Correlation, not causation. Dan's team changed a lot of stuff simultaneously. It's like a whole bunch of stuff got tossed into the Dan Martell truck and taken for a ride. The thing that's impressive here about his hooks is that even when you control for age and other factors like titles and thumbnails, his highest scoring hooks still pull 48 times the views per day as his middle scoring hooks, even within the growth era. If you want to score your hooks against this exact same model instantly for free, there's a link in the description to a tool you can use. Just drop your hook in it and it'll score you against the 4P model and tell you how you rank against the 150,000 hooks we've scored. I told you earlier there was one aspect of thumbnails that mattered more than pixels, and that's in this next metric. It's fascinating, and I don't think I've ever heard anyone on YouTube talk about it ever. And that's awareness. What level of awareness do elements of your video, like your thumbnail, actually target? Famous ad copywriter Eugene Schwartz wrote about this back in the 1960s, and the basic idea is you have to talk to your audience's level of awareness. If they're unaware, you've got to give them certain things. If they're problem aware, you have to address the problem. It makes sense, it's intuitive, and until now, I don't think anyone has bothered to identify it in YouTube content. So check this out. This bottom graph here is the awareness level of Dan's thumbnails charted over time. So blue would be a thumbnail that is targeting solutions. The orange color would be thumbnails that are targeting problems. And the purple would be thumbnails that are targeting the unaware level, or just the most broad section of his audience. So the purple is unaware, and notice what starts to happen here in early 2023 as his channel starts to take off and grow. His thumbnails start to target the unaware level much more aggressively. Prior to this, he was super focused on solutions in the thumbnails. He had this period here where he starts talking about, more product level stuff. But then during this growth period, his mix is about 45% unaware, 34% solution aware, and 19% problem aware. So early on, he had thumbnails that were like how to discover your purpose in life in 2014, which is a solution. And then fast forwarding to his growth stage, he has thumbnails that say time, money, pain, which is basically a universal appeal. So as he starts talking to people with lower levels of awareness, his audience starts to expand. Pretty cool, super underrated, I think, in terms of what you should pay attention to if you want to expand your audience. You've got to meet them at their level of awareness, and it sure seems like Dan nailed that. The next thing we're going to cover, I get asked about a couple of times per week. How much does posting short form help the long form? So on this chart, we have the number of short forms that Dan's channel published per month. Short form came out in, I think, 2021 for the United States, and so it wasn't available prior to that. But here in 2022, he's posting about a little bit more than a short per day, and then he starts to ramp that up in 2023, where they're doing 150 shorts a month. Now, on the chart, it looks obvious, but don't get carried away yet. Dan ramped his shorts output right as his long form views took off, so the natural conclusion might be that shorts drove the growth. The raw correlation looks strong, but it's a trap. Both numbers were climbing at the same time for the same reason. He overhauled the whole channel in 2022 and 2023. When two things rise together, they always look correlated, even if neither is causing the other. So I ran a better test comparing long form videos published in the same quarter. Did the ones that came after a heavier run of shorts actually perform better? The answer is no. The relationship drops to essentially zero. Whether he posted a lot of shorts or a few shorts in the weeks before, the long form videos did about the same. And it makes sense because shorts views are spiky. A short usually pops off for a day or two and then dies. There's no mechanism where last month's shorts are still pulling viewers into this month's long form video. The takeaway is this: shorts volume tracking long form growth on a timeline looks real, but it's probably coincidence, not cause. It is pretty hard to prove from the outside. Maybe shorts drove subscribers who then watched long form, but much later. It's hard to say. But the real difference with shorts versus something like titles or hooks is that shorts are usually more labor intensive and they're optional. You have to have a title and probably a hook and a thumbnail, but you could just skip shorts. This is totally your call based on your resources. Before we get into the single most important factor in Dan's channel growth, let's look at a weird one and be sure we haven't just missed something obvious. And that's his book launch. He published Buy Back Your Time in January of 2023. And looking at this chart, that is before his big growth phase. But there's some problems here. Number one, just because the book preceded the growth doesn't mean the book caused it. And the real growth was about 9 months after the book launch. He really starts to hit this growth curve in September or October of 2023, and the book was published in January of 2023. And number three, I tried to find clean numbers on how many books he sold, which it turns out is really hard to do. Best estimates from the 3 AI agents I had research it for me is it's something like 100,000 to 150,000 copies in the first year. Given that his views grew over 11,000% during this period, and that the growth was 9 months post-book launch, and that if the numbers are true, the book sales are in the low 6 digits, I'd guess it contributed something, but I don't think it's the real difference maker. That's purely my read. But there's one final metric that explains more growth than thumbnails, more than titles, and even more than what we saw with hooks, and that's relevance, which sounds weird, but you can actually chart relevance, and I'll show you here in a second. Clearly, Dan's team changed a lot of stuff all at once. That makes the data science side a lot harder. It'd be great if he changed nothing and then only changed his thumbnail style, but nobody does that. Dan clearly decided to go all in on YouTube in 2023, probably timed with his book launch. He built a media team and that team started crushing it. Titles, thumbnails, hooks, shorts, the whole system. The result is content that found an audience by being more relevant. Relevant packaging gets clicked, relevant hooks get watched, and videos that get clicked and watched get fed by the algorithm at scale. I've built a model of Dan's actual YouTube audience based on what content gets watched and what gets skipped, and that model grades each video based on how relevant it is to the audience model's preferences. If we look at that in this dashed orange line here over time, again, he's got this decade where the content just doesn't click with that audience, and then he starts nailing relevance and it starts taking off. The cool thing is, even if you control for time and every other thing we can think of, it's still highly predictive. It predicts views better than the SAT or the GMAT predicts student performance. It predicts better than your FICO credit score predicts whether you default on your credit card debt. If we plot his videos based on whether the model rates them as high relevance or poor relevance, we can see the correlation here with views. Over here, his videos that score relatively low relevance, there's quite a few of them, have quite a bit of a spread. There are some that perform, but for the most part, they're pretty low performers. And over here, we can see that when his avatar scores his videos as most relevant, he's getting almost 3,000 views per day. When the avatar scores a video a 1 or a 2, it's doing 5 to 13 views per day. And the coolest thing is that the avatar model can score these videos before they get made. That's what I'm building at Hit Factor, so check it out if you want. If you just want to write a better hook, which is the second biggest lever on Dan's channel, check out this video on exactly how to do it.